My name is Marcus Webb. I have explored over 200 abandoned hospitals in 12 years. I documented everything, every room, every corridor, every piece of equipment left behind, every patient record still sitting in a filing cabinet that nobody bothered to empty when the building closed. I have been inside buildings that hadn't seen a living person in 40 years. I have published documentation on almost all of them. Almost. There are 5 buildings I have never published a single frame from. 5 places where what I encountered on the other side of my camera wasn't something I could explain. 5 buildings where something was wrong in a way that didn't fit in any category I had for wrong. I'm going to tell you about all 5 of them, and I want to be clear before I start. I'm not a person who believes in ghosts. I'm not a person who goes into abandoned buildings looking for supernatural experiences. I go in with a camera, a notebook, and 11 years of experience reading the way abandoned spaces settle and decay and fall apart. I know what these buildings look, sound, and smell like when they are just empty. I know the difference between a building that's empty and a building that is not, and these 5 were not empty. Case 1. The door that opened from the wrong side. Grove Memorial closed in 1987 after a series of financial failures that were all documented in the local press. It was 4 stories, 112 beds, a small attached psychiatric ward that has been sealed separately from the main building sometimes in the late 70s. Standard mid-century institutional architecture. I documented a dozen buildings exactly like that. I went in alone, which I had done hundreds of times. The main building was unremarkable. Decay consistent with 30 years of abandonment, no structural surprises, patient records still in the administrative office, the usual collection of abandoned equipment. I documented everything, floor by floor and room by room. I reached the psychiatric ward connection point on the 2nd floor at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The door between the main hospital and the ward had been sealed with a sheet of plywood nailed over the frame. Standard for buildings when one section had been closed before the other. I photographed it, noted in my log, and moved on. I was on the 3rd floor when I heard that door opened. Not creak, not shift under structural pressure, open. The specific sound of a seal door being pulled away from a frame, the pop of the seal breaking, the scrap of wood on concrete. I heard it clearly from 2 floors above. I went back down immediately. The plywood was on the floor and not fallen. It was leaning against the wall beside the frame, the way you would set something down if you were moving it deliberately. The nails that had been secured were still in the plywood. They hadn't been pulled. They'd been pushed from the other side. I did not go through that door. I photographed everything. I logged the time and left the building. When I reviewed my audio recordings that day, I record ambient audio continuously during documentation. There is, on the recording from the 3rd floor, approximately 4 minutes before I heard the door, a sound that I initially logged as structural settling. I have listened to it more than 100 times since. It isn't structural settling. It is at a low frequency that's easier to feel than hear. Something that sounds like it is counting, slowly, like it was keeping track of where I was in the building. Case 2. The photographs that showed something I never saw. St. Augustine's was a tuberculosis sanitarium that operated from 1911 until 1961, when advances in antibiotic treatment made a long-term residential TB care largely obsolete. It had been on my documentation list for 3 years before I finally got access through a property management company handling the estate of the deceased owner. The building was extraordinary. 5 stories of Romanesque revival architecture built into a hillside, designed to maximize sunlight and fresh air per the treatment philosophy of the era. Wrap-around sleeping porches on every floor, still intact. Original patient's bed still on several walls. The iron frames rusted but structurally sound. A table on the 4th floor with a stained glass window that had somehow survived 60 years of abandonment without a single pane broken. I spent 2 full days documenting St. Augustine's. On the first day, nothing unusual occurred. On the second day, I was working through the patient records storage room on the basement level when I found a logbook that stopped me completely. It was a staff duty log from the final year of operation, 1961. Routine entries, shift assignments, patient counts, medication administration records. I was photographing it page by page when I reached an entry from March of that year, approximately 6 months before the sanitarium closed. The entry was in a different handwriting from the surrounding entries, pressed harder onto the paper, The letters is slightly irregular, like someone writing quickly or under stress. It said, "They are still here and they are not patients." No name, no context, no further reference to it in any subsequent entry. I photographed it and kept moving. On that evening, I was working on the third floor sleeping porch in the last hour of available light. I became aware that I was not alone on the porch. It wasn't a sound or a movement, but an awareness. The specific, physical certainty that the space I was standing in was occupied by more than just me. I have felt this in other buildings and I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I know how it sounds. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling of being in a room full of people who were very quietly watching you and had been watching you for some time. I finished my documentation on that floor and left for the evening. When I reviewed my photographs that night, I found something in 17 of the images from the sleeping porch. In the background of each photograph, at the far end of the porch, there is a shape. It is different in each image, different position, slightly different form, but present in 17 consecutive photographs taken over 40 minutes. My camera was the only light source on that porch. Whatever was in this photograph was not visible to me while I was taking them. I have shown those photographs to 3 people I trust. All 3 of them saw the same thing. None of us have been able to explain it. I have never published the St. Augustine's documentation, and I don't intend to. Case 3. The chair that followed me home. Millbrook is one of the largest abandoned psychiatric institutions on the East Coast. It was opened in 1896 and closed in 1994. The main complex covers over 400 acres and includes more than 60 individual structures. It has been documented extensively by urban explorers, photographers, and documentary filmmakers. There is nothing surprising about Millbrook to anyone who has spent time studying abandoned institutional architecture. What happened to me at Millbrook has never happened to anyone else. I was walking through the admissions building on my second visit to the property when I found a room I hadn't found on my first visit. This is not unusual in a complex this size, 60 buildings, hundreds of rooms. You miss things. What was unusual was the room itself. It was a small and interior room, no windows, off a corridor I had definitely walked on my previous visit. The door was not hidden or concealed. It was simply a door in a corridor, the same as every other door. I don't know how I missed it the first time. The room was empty except for one thing. On the floor in the center of the room was a chair, a single wooden chair, the kind that would have been standard issued throughout the facility. It was facing the door, facing me. I photographed the chair and moved on. It was standard documentation. I left Millbrook that afternoon, drove 2 hours to my accommodation and ate dinner and reviewed my photographs and went to sleep. At some point during that night, I don't know the exact time, I woke up. I was in my accommodation, in my bed, and nothing out of the ordinary about the room. But I had the absolute and total certainty, the kind of certainty that bypasses rational thought entirely, that there was someone sitting in a chair at the foot of my bed. I did not look. I want to be honest about that. I lay completely still for what I felt like a long time. And then it was morning and the room was empty and there was no chair. I went back to Millbrook that following day. I found the corridor and I found the door. The room was empty. The chair was gone. There is no record in my documentation of anyone moving it. I was the only person with access to that building that day. I have reviewed the photographs I took of that room more than times that I can count. The chair is there, facing the door and facing me. I have published selected documentation from Millbrook, but not the one from the corridor, and not from the room, and will never. Case 4. The drawings that couldn't have been made by a child. I almost didn't go to Crestview. It's a small building, a regional pediatric facility that operated from 1952 until 1978, closed due to a combination of funding cut and consolidation into a larger regional hospital 40 miles away. 60 beds at its peak, nothing significant, not the kind of building that usually makes it at my documentation list. I went because a colleague mentioned it in passing and it happened to be in that area. The building was in the worst condition than most I documented. The roof had partially failed over the east wing, and the water damage had compromised significant sections of the interior. I walked carefully, sticking to the structure's sounded areas. Standard practice. The West Wing was largely intact and I walked through it. The pediatric ward was on the second floor of the West Wing. 20 beds, still in place, small beds, the kind sized for children. Each one still had its mattress. I was photographing the ward when I noticed the drawings. They were all on the wall at the far end of the room, at a height consistent with a child having made them, roughly 3 feet from the floor. Crayon, mostly the colors faded but visible. Children's drawing, figures, houses, animals, the kind of things that children draw. There were dozens of them covering a section of wall maybe 6 feet wide. I photographed them and was moving on when something made me stop and look more carefully at the drawings in the center of the grouping. Not the subject matter, the style. Every drawing on the wall was in the loose, unpracticed style of a young child, except the ones in the center. The ones in the center were different. They were precise, detailed in a way that was completely inconsistent with the others, and they were depicted was not houses or animals or figures. They depicted the hospital, the building I was standing in, rendered in accurate architectural detail from multiple angles, including angles that would have been only visible from outside the building and from above, aerial perspectives, the kind of a view a child standing inside building could not have had. I photographed every drawing and left the building. I have never been able to identify who made the drawings in the center of the grouping. The hospital records and what survive of them do not indicate any patient during its operational years with any documented artistic ability of that kind. I have shown the photographs to 3 architects and 2 artists. All of them confirmed that the detail and perspective in those central drawings is not consistent with a child's cognitive and motor development at any age that would have been a patient in a pediatric facility. I have never published nothing from the Crestview Children's Hospital.